how do you see codependency come up in romantic relationships? So even what we're describing with parenting, and then thinking about, so I think what's often missed for a lot of the codependents that I work with, and something that I even had to check in on myself, is that often our codependent behavior is actually really controlling. And so, and because we're trying to stay safe, we again adapt these adaptive traits. But I see that it comes up of people maybe monitoring their partner or wanting to be with their partner all the time or telling their partner what to do. And for them, it's coming from a place of they care and they're trying to protect their partner.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's pretty controlling. How do you see that come up with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, God, I see that come up in so many different ways. I mean, you know, I think you're absolutely right in that codependency in and of itself is controlling, right? And so I often will say, like, and I'm happy to admit I'm a control freak. I mean, it's just the reality, right? And it's hard for us to give up control, right? But to me, such an important piece of like my healing journey has been learning how to trust. Right. And that to me is like the opposite of trying to control, right? Is like when we can be in trust, we can let go of control. And I mean that both in relationship, I mean that like in relation to a higher power. I think that that's like hugely important. But yeah, I see this all the time. I mean, I see, and not to bring it back to parenting, I'll bring it to the other relationship, but I'm just thinking about like parents, and I imagine this happens in romantic relationships all the time too, but like you got the tracker on your phone and you're like watching where like your kid or your partner is, and like, you know, and people get like, what do you mean I can't do that? And I'm like, how are you ever going to trust that people are where they say they are, or they're doing what they say they're doing if you're just going on your phone and checking where they are, you know? And I understand, obviously, there's safety things with children. I'm not saying, you know, you can never have it, but codependency is like a false sense of safety, right? We think that we have control by doing things like that. Like when we look at the phone and we see where the person is, for a moment we go, but we don't really know what's going on. People could be doing whatever, you know, so many different things, right? But it gives us this idea that we have the ability to control things, right? So like, you know, I see this come up often where, and I guess I'm bringing it back to substance abuse again, but I'll do that because, you know, there's often a couple where perhaps one of the partners has a drinking issue. Maybe it's not full-blown alcoholism, maybe it is, but then they start kind of monitoring how many drinks is the other person having, right? Oh, you know, you can only have 2 drinks tonight, or remember we agreed it's just, you know, whatever. And they make up these rules because they start trying to police the other person's behavior. And this happens with alcohol, it happens with drugs, it happens with all sorts of things, right? And so we think that we're like helping them by controlling the behavior, when really the other person has work that they need to do on this issue that is not about us and what we're deciding is right for them, right? They really need a professional that's going to help them through their substance abuse issue, and the professional would help them figure out how to navigate all of that, right? But oftentimes, like, we think we know what's right for everybody, right? Like, we've decided, and we all think this, like, we all think we are right about everything, right? But we've decided what is right for them, and then we're going to control them and implement it in a particular way. And then there's a lot of discord that happens because, of course, that's not going to build trust between people, right? People start sneaking around, they start lying, or, oh, yeah, I had 2 drinks, but they really had 3 drinks, or whatever it is, right? We don't want to create that type of atmosphere in a relationship. You know, we want to be able to be honest with one another and then let the chips fall as they may, right? If you can certainly put up boundaries, but it's not going to happen by controlling or policing another person.
Absolutely. And that control, as you're saying, is false because they're going to end up doing what they want to do anyway. And it also often leads to high levels of criticism and nagging. And so now we create this parental relationship where there is an authority figure in your dynamic, which ultimately never works out. And that gives the person who is making these choices almost an out in some ways, that they feel you're taking responsibility. They're happy to give you responsibility. Like, oh, you're nagging me. Then they make, well, you didn't say anything, so I just had another one. And it becomes this really warped dynamic that is no longer about two adults being responsible for themselves, but they're, what codependency is, this enmeshment that takes place where now all of a sudden you have the same rules and the same values and the same opinions. And that ultimately never works, because that's, as you're saying, it's a false sense. Like, that's not actually what's going on. But in order to try to keep the peace, which is where then we see some of these perfectionism behaviors come in, some of the people-pleasing behaviors. And let's talk about how those come up. So, so we see the control, and I just want to put a quick disclaimer, which I already did say, but when a codependent is trying to control a situation, it's not often because they're trying to be controlling. That is often not their motivation. It is because they're afraid, and they are afraid for you. They're afraid for them. They're afraid for the children. And so they're just really trying to find safety. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, can relate to some of those controlling behaviors, just know, like, I see you, I see where it's coming from, and it's not serving you. So just put that out there.